Sarah Martinez walked into the crowded bar with confidence that made heads turn. She wore a simple black t-shirt, but the way she carried herself spoke of years of military training. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her eyes scanned the room with the practiced awareness of someone who had seen combat. The local veterans gathering was in full swing. Men and women in their 50s and 60s shared stories over beer, their voices mixing with classic rock playing from the jukebox. Sarah had been coming to these monthly meetups for 6 months now, ever since she moved to the small coastal town of Millbrook. "Sarah," called out Mike Thompson, a retired Army sergeant who organized these gatherings. "Come over here. I want you to meet someone." She made her way through the crowd, nodding to familiar faces. These people had become her community, the closest thing to family she had in this quiet town where she was trying to rebuild her life. Mike stood next to a tall man with graying temples and suspicious eyes. "This is Detective Ray Collins," Mike said. "He's new to our group. Ray, meet Sarah. She's our resident Navy SEAL." Detective Collins extended his hand, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "A SEAL, huh? That's impressive for someone who looks so young." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "I served my time," she said simply. "Which team?" Collins asked, his tone casual but probing. "Team 6, Sarah replied without hesitation. "Deployed to Afghanistan 3 times. Collins nodded slowly, but Sarah noticed how his jaw tightened slightly. Something in his expression made her stomach tighten with old familiar anxiety. The evening continued normally. Sarah shared a few carefully chosen stories about military life, always vague on specific details but convincing enough to maintain her place in the group. She had perfected this balance over the years, giving enough information to belong, but never so much that anyone could verify her claims. As the night wound down, Sarah said her goodbyes and walked to her old Honda Civic in the parking lot. The coastal air was crisp, carrying the salt smell of the nearby ocean. She was fishing for her keys when she heard footsteps behind her. "Sarah Martinez," Detective Collins called out. "I need you to stop right there." She turned slowly, her heart beginning to race. Collins was no longer alone. 2 uniformed police officers flanked him, their hands resting near their service weapons. "Is there a problem, Detective?" Sarah asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Yeah, there's a problem," Collins said, pulling out his badge. "You're under arrest for stolen valor. You've been impersonating a Navy SEAL, claiming military honors you never earned, and potentially defrauding veteran benefits." Sarah's world tilted. She had been so careful, so methodical in building her new identity. "I think there's been a mistake," she said. "No mistake," Collins replied grimly. "I've been investigating you for 2 months. There's no record of a Sarah Martinez ever serving as a Navy SEAL. In fact, women weren't even allowed in SEAL teams during the time frame you claim to have served." One of the uniformed officers stepped forward with handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent," he began. As the cold metal clicked around her wrists, Sarah's mind raced through possible explanations, escape routes, and damage control. But deep down she knew this moment had been inevitable. She had been living on borrowed time, and now the bill was due. The police car's engine hummed as they drove through the quiet streets of Millbrook. Sarah stared out the window at the life she was about to lose. The small apartment above the bookstore, the job at the marina, the friends who thought they knew her story. What they didn't know, what even Detective Collins hadn't discovered, was that Sarah's deception ran much deeper than simple stolen valor. The truth about who she really was and what she had done would shock everyone who thought they knew her. As they pulled into the police station parking lot, Sarah caught her reflection in the window. For just a moment she saw not the confident woman who had walked into that bar hours earlier, but the scared 20-year-old she had been 15 years ago when everything changed. The truth was buried so deep that sometimes even she forgot it was there. But soon, very soon, someone would dig deep enough to find it. And when they did, everyone would understand that Sarah Martinez's biggest lie wasn't about being a Navy SEAL. Her biggest lie was about who Sarah Martinez really was. The fluorescent lights in the interrogation room buzzed overhead as Detective Collins spread files across the metal table. Sarah sat across from him, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the handcuffs that had only recently been removed. Her lawyer, a young public defender named James Park, scribbled notes on a yellow legal pad. "Let's start from the beginning," Collins said, opening the first file. "You moved to Millbrook 8 months ago. rented an apartment from Mrs. Chen above her bookstore, got a job at Morrison's Marina, and immediately started attending veteran gatherings. Sarah remained silent. As her lawyer had advised, Collins pulled out a stack of photographs. These are from the Veterans Barbecue last 4th of July. Here you are telling Tom Rodriguez about your supposed mission in Kandahar. Here's another one from September, where you're describing underwater demolition training to a group of impressed Marines. He leaned forward, his voice growing harder. Every single story you told, every detail about SEAL training, every tactical procedure you described, it was all stolen from books, documentaries, and online forums. You studied these men's experiences and made them your own. My client has not admitted to anything, James Park interjected, and your evidence is circumstantial at best. Collins smiled coldly. Is it? Because I've spent 3 weeks digging into Sarah Martinez's background. Want to know what I found? He opened another file. Sarah Martinez was born in Tucson, Arizona 28 years ago. Graduated high school with average grades, worked at a coffee shop, then at a call center. No military service whatsoever. No training beyond a community college certificate in customer service. Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she said nothing. Here's what's interesting, though, Collins continued. Sarah Martinez's social security number wasn't issued until 7 years ago. Before that, this person didn't exist in any government database. No birth certificate on file in Arizona. No high school records. It's like Sarah Martinez materialized out of thin air when she was 21 years old. James Park stopped writing and looked at his client with new concern. Detective, what exactly are you implying? I'm implying that your client isn't just guilty of stolen valor. I think Sarah Martinez isn't even her real name. The room fell silent except for the buzzing lights. Sarah stared at a spot on the wall behind Collins' head, her expression unreadable. Collins pulled out his phone and showed them a news article. 7 years ago, there was a house fire in Phoenix. Entire family killed, parents and their daughter, 21-year-old daughter. Authorities found 3 bodies, but they were so badly burned that identification was difficult. He scrolled to another article. 3 months later, a young woman matching the description of the deceased daughter applied for a duplicate Social Security card in Tucson, claiming hers was lost in a house fire. She had enough personal information to convince the clerk she was legitimate. Sarah's hands, which had been steady throughout the interrogation, began to tremble slightly. The real Sarah Martinez died in that fire, Collins said quietly. The question is, who are you? Before anyone could respond, there was a knock on the door. A uniformed officer entered and whispered something in Collins' ear. The detective's eyebrows shot up. Well, this is interesting, Collins said, closing his files. It seems we have a visitor. Someone from the Pentagon wants to speak with you. Sarah's composure cracked for the first time. Her eyes widened and she gripped the edge of the table. The Pentagon? James Park asked. Why would the Department of Defense be interested in a stolen valor case? Collins was already standing. That's what we're about to find out. But I have a feeling this case just got a lot more complicated. As they prepared to leave the interrogation room, Collins noticed something he hadn't seen before. When Sarah gripped the table, her sleeve had ridden up slightly, revealing the edge of a tattoo on her inner wrist. It was partially visible, what looked like a trident surrounded by complex geometric patterns. He had seen thousands of military tattoos in his career, but this one was different. The craftsmanship was too precise, too detailed for a typical parlor job. And something about the design nagged at him. Collins made a mental note to get a better look at that tattoo. In his experience, tattoos often told stories that people preferred to keep hidden, and he had a growing suspicion that Sarah Martinez, or whoever she really was, had a story that went far deeper than simple identity. Theft. The woman walking ahead of him in shackles had fooled an entire community of veterans with her military knowledge. That kind of detailed understanding didn't come from books and documentaries alone. It came from experience, but if that was true, then everything Collins thought he knew about this case was wrong. The conference room at Millbrook Police Station had never hosted someone of Admiral Catherine Kate Morrison's stature. At 55, she carried herself with the bearing of someone who had commanded respect in the highest levels of military intelligence. Her dress uniform was immaculate, ribbons and medals telling the story of a distinguished 30-year career. Detective Collins, Chief of Police Martha Hendricks, and Prosecutor David Chen sat on one side of the table. Sarah, still in handcuffs, sat across from them with her lawyer. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. "Admiral Morrison," Chief Hendricks began, "we appreciate you coming all this way for what appears to be a straightforward stolen valor case. But I'm not sure why the Pentagon is involved." Admiral Morrison opened a slim briefcase and withdrew a single file folder. "Chief Hendricks, I can assure you this case is anything but straightforward." She turned her attention to Sarah, studying her face intently. 7 years is a long time. You look different with dark hair." Sarah met her gaze but remained silent, though her breathing had quickened noticeably. "Admiral," James Park interjected, "my client has not waived her right to remain silent. If you have information relevant to these charges, we need to know what it is." Admiral Morrison smiled slightly. "Mr. Park, the charges your client is facing may be about to change dramatically." She opened the file and withdrew several photographs. The first was a military ID photo of a young woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. The facial structure was remarkably similar to Sarah's. "This is Lieutenant Elena Vasquez, United States Navy. She served with distinction in Naval Special Warfare Group 1 from 2015 to 2018. Detective Collins leaned forward, studying the photo. The resemblance was undeniable, but something was off. "Admiral, if this woman is your Lieutenant Vasquez, then who is sitting across from us?"
"That," Admiral Morrison said, "is an excellent question.
One that has been puzzling certain people in Washington for 7 years. She placed another document on the table, an official death certificate. Lieutenant Elena Vasquez was declared dead following a classified operation in 2018. Her body was never recovered." The room fell completely silent. Sarah's lawyer stopped taking notes and stared at his client. Admiral Morrison continued. "Lieutenant Vasquez was part of a highly classified counterintelligence operation. She had undergone extensive training in identity assumption, deep cover operations, and psychological warfare. She was fluent in 4 languages and had an eidetic memory for tactical procedures." "Are you saying," Chief Hendricks asked slowly, "that this woman is actually a Navy SEAL who faked her own death?" "I'm saying that the woman sitting across from us knows things that only Lieutenant Elena Vasquez would know, including the meaning of a very specific tattoo." Admiral Morrison's eyes fixed on Sarah's wrist. "May I see your inner wrist, please?" Sarah hesitated, then slowly extended her arm. Admiral Morrison gently pushed back the sleeve, revealing the intricate tattoo Collins had glimpsed earlier. It was a trident surrounded by a complex pattern of symbols and numbers. The Admiral's breath caught. "My God, it really is you. What is that tattoo?" Collins demanded. "It's a classified identification marker used only by members of the most elite counterintelligence units. Each tattoo is unique, containing encrypted information about the operative's mission parameters and extraction protocols." Admiral Morrison pulled out a magnifying glass and studied the tattoo carefully. "The symbols indicate Unit 7 deep cover operations. The numbers are coordinates and dates. This tattoo was created by military tattoo artists using special ink that shows different patterns under ultraviolet light." She looked directly at Sarah. "Elena, it's time to come home." Sarah finally spoke, her voice hoarse with emotion. "Kate, they said I was burned. They said everyone on my team died in that warehouse explosion in Damascus. We thought you did. When we couldn't extract you after the operation went sideways, when we found blood and DNA evidence at the site, we had to make the hard choice. We declared you KIA and closed the file." Detective Collins felt like he was watching a movie. "Wait a minute. You're telling me that instead of arresting someone for stolen valor, we've actually found a missing Navy SEAL who was declared dead?" Admiral Morrison nodded grimly. "Lieutenant Vasquez was deep undercover for 18 months, gathering intelligence on international arms dealers. When her cover was blown and the extraction failed, she had to use her emergency protocols." She gestured toward the files Collins had compiled. "Creating a new identity, studying the backstories of real people blending into civilian communities. This was exactly what she was trained to do. Unfortunately, she did it so well that she disappeared completely, even from us." Sarah's lawyer looked confused. "So my client isn't guilty of stolen valor? She actually was a Navy SEAL?" "More than that," Admiral Morrison replied. "She was one of the first women selected for the most classified Special Operations Unit in the Navy. Everything she told those veterans about her service, the deployments, the missions, the training, it was all true. She just couldn't tell them who she really was or what she really did." Collins shook his head in amazement. "So when she claimed to be Sarah Martinez, a Navy SEAL, She was lying about the name but telling the truth about the service. Exactly. Admiral Morrison turned back to Sarah with obvious relief and something that looked like maternal pride. Elena, you've been missing for 7 years. We need to debrief you, and there are a lot of people in Washington who will be very happy to know you're alive. Sarah, Elena, wiped tears from her eyes. I couldn't risk making contact. I thought the entire operation was compromised. I thought if I surfaced, I'd put everyone else in danger. You did exactly what you were trained to do, Admiral Morrison assured her. You survived. But Detective Collins still had questions. If this is all true, why didn't she just tell us who she was when we arrested her? Admiral Morrison and Elena exchanged a meaningful look. Because, Elena said quietly, the mission I was on 7 years ago isn't over, and the people who tried to kill me are still out there. The secure conference room had been cleared of everyone except Admiral Morrison, Elena, and 2 federal agents who had arrived within hours of the Admiral's phone call. Detective Collins and Chief Hendricks waited in the hallway, both struggling to process the complete transformation of their stolen valor case. Inside the room, Elena sat across from Admiral Morrison, her hands finally free of handcuffs. 7 years of carefully constructed identity had crumbled in a matter of hours, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. Tell me about Damascus, Admiral Morrison said gently. Tell me what really happened that night. Elena closed her eyes, transporting herself back to that sweltering night in Syria. The arms deal was supposed to go down at midnight in the old warehouse district. I had been embedded with Dmitry Kozlov's organization for 8 months, posing as a black market weapons specialist from Eastern Europe. She paused, her hands unconsciously tracing the pattern of her tattoo. Kozlov trusted me. I had helped him broker 3 major deals, always making sure our people intercepted the weapons before they reached their final destinations. The Damascus meeting was going to be the big one. Shoulder-fired missiles, enough to take down commercial aircraft. Admiral Morrison nodded, familiar with the broad outlines of the operation but hearing the details for the first time. Everything went wrong from the start, Elena continued. When I arrived at the warehouse, Kozlov was already there with twice as many men as expected. He looked at me differently, suspicious. I knew my cover was blown before he even spoke. She stood and walked to the window, staring out at the small town that had been her sanctuary. He said he'd received information that there was an American spy in his organization. Said he'd been told she was a woman, someone who had been with him for months. Someone betrayed you, Admiral Morrison said. It wasn't a question. More than that, someone from our side. Kozlov knew details about the operation that only a handful of people had access to. He knew my real name, Kate. He called me Lieutenant Vasquez before he ordered his men to kill me. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic outside. Elena turned back to face the Admiral. I managed to get to the explosives I had planted as a contingency. When I triggered them, the whole warehouse went up. In the chaos, I escaped through a drainage tunnel, but not before taking shrapnel to my leg and arm. I bled all over that tunnel. That's where we found your DNA, Admiral Morrison confirmed. We assumed you died in the explosion. I almost did. I made it to the safe house, but I knew it was compromised too. If someone on our team had burned me to Kozlov, nowhere in the official network was safe. Elena sat back down, her voice growing quieter. I activated Protocol 7, complete identity dissolution. I destroyed all my identification, used my emergency cash reserves, and went completely off-grid. I knew you would declare me dead if you found blood evidence and no body. Admiral Morrison leaned forward. Elena, why didn't you try to make contact after you recovered? Why stay hidden for 7 years? Because I spent those first few months trying to figure out who had betrayed me. I intercepted communications, followed money trails, hacked into classified databases. What I found scared me more than Kozlov ever did. She pulled a small flash drive from her pocket, the same pocket she had carried it in for 7 years, waiting for this moment. The leak wasn't random. Someone in naval intelligence was feeding information to multiple arms dealers, not just Kozlov. They were using our operations to eliminate competition and consolidate the illegal weapons trade under their preferred partners. Admiral Morrison's face went pale. Who? I couldn't prove it definitively, but the evidence pointed to someone high up in Special Operations Command, someone who had access to all our mission parameters and personnel files. Elena handed over the flash drive. Everything is on there. Financial records, communication intercepts, timeline analysis. I've been gathering evidence for 7 years, waiting for the right moment to surface. One of the federal agents spoke for the first time. Ma'am, if this intelligence is accurate, we're looking at a massive corruption scandal. Multiple ongoing operations could be compromised. Admiral Morrison pocketed the flash drive. Elena, you've been carrying this burden alone for 7 years. Why surface now? Why take the risk? Elena smiled sadly. Because Detective Collins was getting close. His investigation was thorough enough that it would eventually lead to questions I couldn't answer. I realized it was better to be discovered by you than to be exposed by someone who might be working with the people I've been hiding from. She gestured toward the window. And because I'm tired, Kate. 7 years of looking over my shoulder. 7 years of building friendships I knew were based on lies. 7 years of being dead to everyone who ever mattered to me. Admiral Morrison reached across the table and squeezed Elena's hand. You're not dead anymore. And you're not alone. What happens now? Elena asked. Now we debrief you properly. We analyze your intelligence. We find out who betrayed you and make sure they never betray anyone else. Admiral Morrison stood, her bearing shifting back to full command mode. And then, Lieutenant Vasquez, you're going to help us finish the mission you started 7 years ago. Elena felt a familiar stirring, the sense of purpose that had driven her through years of dangerous assignments. What about Sarah Martinez? What about the life I built here? Sarah Martinez was a cover identity, but the person you became in Millbrook was real. The friendships you made, the community you joined, that was you, not a character you were playing. Admiral Morrison moved toward the door. We'll work something out. But first, we have a lot of work to do. As they prepared to leave, Elena looked back at the small town visible through the window. Mike Thompson and the other veterans were probably still wondering what had happened to their friend Sarah. Soon, she hoped, she would be able to tell them at least part of the truth. But first, she had to finish what she had started in Damascus 7 years ago. 3 weeks later, Elena found herself in a secure facility outside Washington, D.C., staring at photographs and files spread across multiple computer screens. The debriefing had taken days, but analyzing her 7 years of gathered intelligence was taking much longer. Commander Sarah Chen, Admiral Morrison's top intelligence analyst, pointed to a financial flowchart displayed on the wall. Your data confirms what we suspected but could never prove. Someone has been using our special operations as a cover for private arms dealing worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Elena studied the chart, connecting dots she had been piecing together for years. The pattern is clear now. Every operation that was compromised resulted in our targets being eliminated, but their weapon stockpiles were never recovered by our people. Because they were being sold to different buyers, Admiral Morrison added, entering the room with a grim expression. We've identified at least 12 operations over the past decade that follow this pattern. Commander Chen pulled up another screen showing personnel records. Cross-referencing access logs with the compromised operations gives us a list of 17 possible suspects. All of them had access to mission parameters, and all of them were in positions to communicate with external contacts. Elena walked closer to the screen, her trained eye scanning the faces and service records. One photo made her stop cold. That's him, she said quietly, pointing to a distinguished-looking man in dress blues. Captain Marcus Webb. I saw him twice at Kozlov's compound in Syria, but he was using a different name. Admiral Morrison and Commander Chen exchanged glances. Elena, that's a very serious accusation. Captain Webb is currently assigned to the Joint Chiefs Strategic Planning Committee. He has access to some of the most sensitive operations in the military. I'm certain it was him. He has a distinctive scar on his left hand from a training accident. I noticed it during briefings, and I saw the same scar when he met with Kozlov. Elena pulled up security footage she had secretly recorded during her undercover work. The quality was poor, but when enhanced, it clearly showed a man with Webb's build and the characteristic scar. He was calling himself Michael Carson then. Kozlov introduced him as his American contact, someone who provided advance intelligence about military operations. Commander Chen began typing rapidly. If Webb is our leak, we need to be extremely careful. He has access to current operations, including the investigation into your disappearance and return. As if on cue, Admiral Morrison's secure phone rang. Her face grew increasingly serious as she listened to the caller. We have a problem, she announced after hanging up. 3 hours ago, Captain Webb requested a copy of all files related to Elena's case. claiming it was for a security review ordered by the Joint Chiefs. Elena felt the old familiar chill of being hunted. He knows I'm alive. If he's the one who betrayed me 7 years ago, he'll try to finish the job. Not if we get to him first, Admiral Morrison said firmly. But we need solid evidence that will hold up in a military court. Your testimony and the surveillance footage are a start, but we need more. Commander Chen was already working on her computer. I can trace the financial transactions in Elena's intelligence cache. If Webb was being paid for information, there will be a money trail. Elena moved to another terminal and began accessing databases she hadn't touched in years. I kept digital copies of everything I saw at Kozlov's operations. Financial records, shipping manifests, communication logs. If Webb was coordinating with them, it's all documented. The next several hours blurred together as the team worked to build their case. Elena's 7 years of meticulous intelligence gathering had created a treasure trove of evidence, but organizing it into a prosecutable case required connecting dozens of complex threads. Around midnight, Commander Chen made a breakthrough. I found it. Regular payments from shell companies connected to Kozlov's organization, deposited into an account registered to a company Webb owns through his wife. Elena looked up from her own research. And I found the smoking gun. Communication intercepts showing Webb providing specific details about my mission timeline and extraction points. Admiral Morrison studied the evidence, her jaw set in determination. This is enough to arrest him, but we need to be smart about this. If Webb suspects we're closing in, he might run or destroy evidence. Or eliminate witnesses, Elena added grimly. Admiral Morrison made a decision. We're going to set a trap. Elena, Webb thinks you're dead. We're going to keep it that way, until the moment we spring it. She turned to Commander Chen. Prepare a false briefing document indicating that Sarah Martinez was conclusively proven to be a fraud with no military background. Make it look like we've closed the case and moved on. What about me? Elena asked. You're going to do what you do best, Admiral Morrison replied with a slight smile. You're going to become someone else, get close to Webb, and gather the evidence we need to put him away forever. Elena felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. After 7 years of hiding, she was going back into the field. What's my cover? Admiral Morrison handed her a new identity packet. Meet Dr. Elizabeth Harper, defense contractor and weapons systems analyst. Tomorrow you have a meeting with Captain Webb to discuss a classified project. Elena studied the new identity, her mind already shifting into operational mode. And if he recognizes me? Then we find out just how desperate he is to keep his secrets buried. Outside the secure facility, Washington, D.C. glittered in the darkness. Somewhere in that city, Captain Marcus Webb was sleeping peacefully, unaware that the woman he had tried to kill 7 years ago was about to walk back into his life. But this time, Elena would be the hunter instead of the prey. Dr. Elizabeth Harper walked into the Pentagon conference room with the confident stride of someone accustomed to military environments. Her auburn hair was styled differently than Elena's dark ponytail, and colored contact lenses had changed her distinctive blue eyes to brown. Subtle makeup had altered the shape of her face enough to confuse casual recognition. Captain Marcus Webb stood as she entered, extending his hand with a politician's smile. Dr. Harper, thank you for coming. I understand you specialize in emerging weapons detection systems. Elena shook his hand, noting the scar on his left hand that had haunted her memories for 7 years. Her own hand remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Captain Webb, I appreciate you considering my proposal. Anti-smuggling technology could save countless lives. They sat across from each other at the polished conference table. Elena had a micro camera hidden in her briefcase and a recording device disguised as a pen. Everything Webb said would be captured. Your proposal is intriguing, Webb began, opening a file folder. But I have concerns about implementation. Our current intelligence networks are quite sophisticated. Elena leaned forward, playing her role perfectly. That's exactly the problem, Captain. Current networks assume internal security. My research suggests that weapons smuggling operations often have inside information about military interdiction efforts. Webb's expression didn't change, but Elena caught the slight tightening around his eyes. That's a serious allegation, Dr. Harper. Do you have evidence of such breaches? Hypothetically speaking, Elena said carefully, if someone wanted to study this problem, where would they look? What operations might have been compromised? Webb was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Helena could see him calculating, trying to determine if this was a genuine business meeting or something more dangerous. Well, he said finally, there have been instances where operations didn't go as planned. Take the Damascus incident 7 years ago, for example. We lost an entire team and millions of dollars in weapons were never recovered. Elena's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. Damascus? That sounds like exactly the kind of case study that would be useful for my research. Webb seemed to relax slightly, perhaps deciding that discussing old, officially closed cases was safe. It was a perfect example of how intelligence can be compromised. We had an operative deep undercover, but somehow the arms dealers knew exactly when and where our people would move. How unfortunate. What happened to your operative? Killed in action. These things happen in our line of work. Webb's casual dismissal of Elena's supposed death sent a chill through her. Elena pressed forward. If you were investigating such a breach, where would you start looking? Webb leaned back in his chair, his guard dropping further. The reality is that these operations involve so many moving parts. Intelligence analysts, communication specialists, logistics coordinators, any one of them could be the weak link. But surely there are protocols to prevent such breaches. Protocols are only as good as the people implementing them. And sometimes, Dr. Harper, people have their own motivations beyond patriotic duty. Elena saw her opening. Motivations like financial gain? Webb smiled coldly. The arms trade is extremely lucrative. A single piece of intelligence about military operations can be worth millions to the right buyer. That's fascinating from a research perspective. Have you seen evidence of such financial motivations in real cases? Webb paused, studying her more carefully. Elena held her breath, wondering if she had pushed too hard. Dr. Harper, you ask very specific questions for someone developing detection technology. I believe in thorough research, Captain. The more I understand how these systems are compromised, the better I can design countermeasures. Webb nodded slowly, apparently accepting her explanation. Well, in the Damascus case, for instance, the timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Someone with access to operational details had to have provided advance warning. And was this person ever identified? Officially? No. The case was closed when we lost our operative. But between you and me, Webb leaned forward conspiratorially. The investigation never should have been dropped. Elena leaned forward as well, matching his posture. Why not? Because whoever provided that intelligence is still out there, probably still selling secrets. The arms dealers we were targeting in Damascus simply moved their operations elsewhere and continued business as usual. How do you know that? Webb realized he had said too much. His expression shifted, becoming guarded again. Intelligence reports, of course. We monitor these organizations continuously. Elena decided to take the biggest risk of her career. Captain Webb, what if I told you that Lieutenant Elena Vasquez didn't die in Damascus? The color drained from Webb's face. His hand moved instinctively toward his service weapon before he caught himself. That's impossible. Elena Vasquez has been dead for 7 years, has she? Elena reached up and removed her colored contacts, revealing her distinctive blue eyes. Hello, Marcus. Surprised to see me? Webb's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. This is impossible. You died in that warehouse. I saw the intelligence reports. You saw the reports you helped create. Just like you helped create the situation that was supposed to kill me. Webb's hand was definitely moving toward his weapon now, but Elena was faster. In one fluid motion, she was out of her chair and had his arm pinned behind his back. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Marcus. This room is under surveillance and Admiral Morrison is watching everything. As if summoned by her words, the conference room door opened and Admiral Morrison entered with 2 military police officers. Webb's shoulders sagged in defeat as he realized the trap had closed around him. Captain Marcus Webb, Admiral Morrison announced formally, you are under arrest for treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The military police moved forward to handcuff Webb, but he wasn't finished talking. Perhaps realizing his situation was hopeless, or maybe just needing to unburden himself after years of deception, he began to confess. You have no idea what you've stumbled into, Webb said, his voice bitter. This goes far beyond one corrupt officer selling intelligence. Elena kept her distance but remained alert. Tell us about it, Marcus. Tell us about the network you've been part of. Webb laughed harshly. Network? You think this was some elaborate conspiracy? It started with one bad decision 7 years ago and it spiraled completely out of control. Admiral Morrison gestured for the military police to wait. Explain. I was drowning in debt. My wife's medical bills, my daughter's college tuition, my father's nursing home costs. I was facing bankruptcy, losing everything I'd worked 30 years to build. Webb slumped into his chair, suddenly looking much older than his 52 years. Dmitry Kozlov approached me at a defense contractor conference. He said he knew about my financial troubles, said he could help. All he wanted was advance notice when we were planning operations against arms dealers. So you could warn them, Elena said. It wasn't a question. At first, yes, simple warnings that let them move operations before we arrived. No one got hurt and I received enough money to keep my family afloat. Admiral Morrison's expression was ice cold. But it escalated. Kozlov got greedier. He wanted detailed intelligence about specific operations, personnel assignments, extraction plans. And he started asking for more than just warnings. Elena felt sick as the implications became clear. He wanted you to help eliminate the competition. Webb nodded miserably. By the time I realized what I was really part of, it was too late to back out. Kozlov had evidence of everything I'd done. He owned me completely. So when you learned about my mission in Damascus, Elena pressed, you gave him everything he needed to kill me and my entire support team. I thought if I gave him one big score, enough to eliminate a major rival operation, he would let me go. I never intended for anyone to die. Admiral Morrison stepped forward. Captain Webb, 4 other operatives died because of intelligence you provided over the years. Lieutenant Vasquez was just the one who managed to survive. Webb's face crumpled. I know. I've lived with that knowledge every day for 7 years. When I heard that Sarah Martinez was arrested for stolen valor, I thought it might be you, but the report said she was just a fraud. Reports you made sure to see, Elena observed. You were still watching, still worried that I might surface someday. I was terrified you might be alive. Terrified of this exact moment. Admiral Morrison had heard enough. Captain Webb, you will be transferred to military custody pending court-martial. The evidence Lieutenant Vasquez gathered, combined with your confession, will ensure you spend the rest of your life in military prison. As the military police led Webb away, he turned back to Elena one last time. For what it's worth, Lieutenant, I'm glad you survived. I'm glad someone finally stopped me. Elena watched him go, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Relief that her 7-year hunt was over, satisfaction that justice would be served, but also a strange sadness for the broken man who had caused so much damage. Admiral Morrison placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. It's over. You can finally come home. What about the rest of Kozlov's network? Webb was just one piece of a larger operation. We'll get them. With Webb's cooperation and your intelligence, we can roll up the entire organization, but that's a job for other people now. Elena looked around the conference room where her old life had officially ended, and her real life could finally begin again. What happens to me now? That's up to you. You can return to active duty if you want. God knows the Navy could use someone with your skills and experience. Elena considered this but shook her head. I think I've been a soldier long enough. 7 years in hiding taught me there's more to life than missions and operations. Admiral Morrison smiled. What about Sarah Martinez? What about Millbrook? Sarah Martinez was a cover, but the friendships I made there were real. Mike Thompson and the other veterans accepted me as one of their own. I'd like to go back if possible. We can arrange that. Your service record will be declassified enough to explain your presence in the community. You can tell them the truth about your military service, just not about the classified operations. 3 months later, Elena sat in the same bar where Detective Collins had arrested her, but this time the atmosphere was celebratory. Mike Thompson raised his beer in a toast to the gathered veterans. To Elena Vasquez, who we knew as Sarah Martinez, and who it turns out is exactly the hero we always thought she was. The crowd cheered and applauded. Detective Collins, now a friend rather than an adversary, shook his head in amazement. I still can't believe I arrested a real Navy SEAL for pretending to be a Navy SEAL. Elena laughed, feeling truly relaxed for the first time in 7 years. Ray, you did your job perfectly. You investigated someone who claimed military service they couldn't prove. The fact that it turned out to be true was just an unexpected twist. She looked around at the faces of her friends, people who had accepted her back into their community, Once they learned the truth about her service, the lies were finally over, replaced by a different kind of truth. Elena Vasquez had spent 7 years being dead, 7 years being someone else, and 7 years hunting the man who had betrayed her. Now, finally, she could spend the rest of her life being herself. And for a Navy SEAL who had completed the longest, most dangerous mission of her career, that felt like the greatest victory of all.